don't know what I'm gonna talk about, but as long as I talk about it, there's gonna be no issue. Immaculate, a movie that's far from it, but hey, an enjoyable experience. It's not every day that you get a movie that talks about nuns being evil, right? It's not like there's a whole franchise of it. It's not like when it came out there was another movie about nuns. You know, it's pretty original. Yeah, so the movie is basically follows the same type of line where there's something evil in the church and they're like, well, we're gonna put our spin to it. So I'm gonna say this, it's very weird that the first Omen and Immaculate came out like near the same time, because both movies are just kinda talking about the same situations in just different spectrums, you know? So, spoiler warning, I'm gonna be talking about the movie Immaculate with Sydney Sweeney, so keep it in your pants, please. And obviously I'm gonna talk about like the story aspect of it, or at least my thoughts on it. So what happens here is that, I'm gonna say this now, the margin for me to rate movies, and I need to say this here, Five Nights at Freddy's is a 5 out of 10. That is the middle ground. It is mid. Immaculate, in my opinion, is around a 7 to 7.5. It was decent, could have been better, but it wasn't a bad experience on a first watch. During a second watch, where you're already expecting things, you're just looking over certain story tidbits, and you're just kind of like, alright, it's not super smart, it's not super scary, it has good ambiance, cool scenes, but it doesn't really decide what it wants to be, if it really wants to go really down the line, or if it really wants to go another line. At least, and this is why it's a 7.5, it doesn't rely on jump scares. That is the most important thing about all this. It doesn't fall into that. It's not another Insidious clone. So, without further ado, the Immaculate movie. It is a very peculiar type story, because it starts out really strong and then that first act goes to a screeching halt. Imagine you're in a roller coaster and you take kind of a deep drop, you know, it's pretty steep, gets your adrenaline pumping, but then you go into a lift. And you're probably thinking, oh, you know, they're setting things up, it's already going to go fast, since you already had a very brief moment where you're like, this is going very fast. And then just, no, it's one of those chain lifts taking you very high up. And you're just kind of wondering what's at the bottom. You're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. It's more like an elevator lift with like 20 other people, so the elevator's really struggling to get up there. But I digress. It's still, I guess, a good way to really introduce the character, but in reality, I never felt really connected to the protagonist, because you don't really see her outside of what happens, or really in her nature, how she is. Apart from, she literally gets to the place, the place where all the nuns are living. She's a nun, by the way, if you didn't notice. She's like super young, she wants to be a nun, and she goes to this covenant, I think they're called, and literally goes to work there. And so the movie takes place almost exclusively within this covenant in Italy. So she went from, like, I don't know, Idaho, America, I forgot where she was from, I think Detroit, from her church that closed down because of low attendance, and went over to Italy to work with some nuns. She literally said, well, my calling is this, let me go straight to like the birth point of all of this, and just went to live in Rome. And kind of wild, because she doesn't know Italian. You would expect that one of the first things you would do before deciding, let me do this life-altering decision to go live in somewhere else, is learn the language. But normal. That first act is really slow, really slow, and then you jump into the second act, which is way more interesting. That's where it really gets the ball rolling, you know? That second act, the way that they're treating her, the way that they're pushing everything, the way that the narrative starts taking up pace, it's like they finally got the rock up the hill and it can finally start rolling. But it takes too long, in my opinion, for that ball to be rolling. The ball should have been rolling from the beginning, and it should have just gotten steeper so that it goes faster, you know? Because there's a point where you're watching the entire movie and you're watching her be set up and doing this and gets another friend who's American, and it's a little weird that there's another Is she American? I actually don't know. No, she's Italian. She just can speak English. And it just, she's there. She doesn't really look like a nun, but in the idea of it, it makes sense because both of these characters have one or two things. They are both characters with emotional traumas that have been indoctrinated into the church and are being manipulated by that trauma, which is something that every single religion tends to do. They see somebody in complete and utter distraught and they go, come to me, I have the solution. Just follow this random religious figure and your solution's there and you're gonna be fine. And no, I don't like that, and I'm somebody who's religious, and I've never liked that in any sort of aspect because it's manipulation. I know not everyone does it, but you can see it when you're going around a church and somebody, let's say somebody's mother died, and they automatically just start going around the person being like, you're gonna be fine. They give this overwhelming positivity and support, which is great and all. But it feels disingenuous when you look at it like you're helping a stranger, but in reality you're helping the stranger because you want them to become part of your faction or how they say family. It feels a little disingenuous. People are extremely emotional. They don't tend to do the most rational of decisions, and that's, you know, which again, this kind of leads into the movie. She is very emotionally distraught, which leads her to take this decision of just up and leaving to a country she doesn't know how to talk, to live with people she can barely communicate with, and she quite literally has to go through all of this. Nice setup. The opening scene, and I haven't talked about it because the whole setup of her, who is our protagonist, is way more important than everything else that happens in the movie. But like, the opening scene is extremely direct and intense. There's this nun, she's super young, like all the nuns that are leaving are super young, and we'll get to that in a bit, why the ones that are leaving are super young. She's there, she steals some keys, starts running out with her bag and tries leaving. She can't find the key, and now we got this faction of masked nuns like going after her. Like, they're not running, they're just walking, and she's like panicking and she's starting to go through. She tries squeezing through, they catch her leg, they snap her leg, so now she can't even walk. They pull her back in and they bury her alive. Like, that scene, in my opinion, that opening sequence really draws you into the movie because it's very shock value, and it's like, look, it's a good way to do it. You're not jump scaring me, you're really just showcasing what the danger is. But then how does this danger tie into the protagonist? Let me talk about the first issue of the movie. These nuns don't do that ever again, except in one minuscule scene, but it's never to our protagonist. So it kind of feels like she's untouchable, and, well, yes, to a certain extent she is untouchable, but they don't really show the nuns doing something or being a presence in the movie, in the life of this protagonist, or Sydney Sweeney, until, like, one certain scene where it's kind of lucid, like a dream, and it makes sense why the lucidity. I'll get to that scene in a bit. And another scene where they're torturing her friend for other reasons that I'll get to. So let's get to the first thing. Sydney Sweeney gets to the place, gets introduced, sees all this, meets the priest, talking to him. He's really young for a priest. I think that's an issue, in my opinion, in the movie. He's really young. I feel like if you would have made him to be a more older character, it would have been more unlikable or easier to hate, you know? Because if he wasn't so young, he looked like Sydney Sweeney's age, and I think you should have casted somebody more into their late 40s, 50s, so that it looks more like someone who has been dedicating their life. Because, spoilers, I already said that, the priest is a bad guy. Everybody in this covenant is evil to a certain extent. And it's, it's a great setup, but it's obviously a little funny to think about because it's kind of like you see everybody's evil except the friend. That's the only person they tell you is not evil. So the priest, in my opinion, should have been older. It would have made him a bit more hateable, or a bit more. How do I say this? It would have made it more obvious that he was a bad guy, because everybody in the movie is a bad guy. But in the sense of like, it's not really foreshadowing, because instead of it being it doesn't work like a twist. Because the way they set it up in like the opening sequence is that the main nun, the head nun, is the most aggressive one and the one who kind of keeps everybody in line. So you would think that she's like the master manipulator in all this. But then there's somebody above her, which is the priest. But there's also the bishop who's above that priest, but the bishop doesn't have a presence. He just kind of exists and just says, oh, you're this person, or you're that person, just confirms stuff. Because he's the messenger for the other priest to the Vatican. And that's kind of why they're there. It's a trio. All three of them are in the same plan. And although, yes, it is plausible, it also, but it's not that it doesn't make sense. It's just kind of weird how quiet everybody keeps the situation about the nuns. Because I think that if any news outlet, why is the police outside my house? I think any news outlet sees a covenant, a place where a bunch of nuns live, and sees them dying, disappearing, or suiciding, killing themselves. I think that any reporter would probably be looking into it, be kind of like, something's wrong here, let's investigate. A bunch of people are missing, and they have this tendency of being young. Now, I know that this is a covenant for, the cover is that this is a place for nuns that are very old to go and die, to make it easier for them to die. They're already dying, they're senile, they're sick, whatever. And like, yeah, but if the people that are disappearing are young people, even if the church is hiding it, somebody will notice. Like, some reporter's gonna be like, this is an extremely closed off space from the rest of society, being something that's kind of public, because the church doesn't treat itself as private, although they hide a bunch of things. They talk as a government entity, right? They don't really say that they're private because they're meant to be working for the people, but they are private because, well, they hide everything. They don't really give you all the information. So, seeing as these nuns are going through all this and people are dying, nobody batting an eye. The police seem to know about it. Nobody bats an eye, and it's just kind of questions more into like the build up to all this, because if the police know, if the church knows, it's more of a open kept secret. Everybody knows kind of what they're doing here, or that there's something sketchy going on, and at no given point do they investigate. I just feel like, look, I know the police could be easily bought off, but I feel like one journalist is just gonna be like, hey, what's going on there? And the cop's gonna tell them, oh yeah, you don't want to know. You're not gonna go through there, just leave it be, whatever. That's just gonna make the journalist be like, they said no, now I want to do it more, And it's just, man, why is nobody like knowing or anything? There's no world presence in the movie because nothing truly is going on around the world. Especially when you see what the setup is. So the main plot of this, or the twist of this, is that this nun and all of the imagery is around the Virgin Mary. And this priest, this covenant, has the nail, which I think is... I don't think it would be possible for the church to keep that nail there. I feel like, in any case, they would have kept it in the Vatican, or they would have destroyed it to make sure that there's no evidence so that people can't counteract against what the church establishes. Which is why this movie is classified as blasphemy, in my opinion, because everything else is just kind of normal horror movie stuff. This is the only thing that I'm like, oh yeah, this is blasphemy and kind of predictable. They have in that covenant the nail which was used against Jesus Christ, the crucified Jesus Christ, and it's just kind of like, okay, yes, why is the nail important? Because supposedly in the movie, I don't know about it in real life, I'm not gonna research about it, I'm just gonna talk about the movie. And I'm gonna talk about what I know, why it would be blasphemy to the church. The nail has genetic material of Jesus Christ. And it's blasphemy because, well, since everything in the Bible and the way that the church teaches you is that they tell you, oh yeah, Jesus Christ was resurrected, his material body just doesn't exist anymore, and he becomes one with God. So that's why there's no like genetic evidence of Jesus, but there is evidence that he existed because of the things he had, like the mask that covered him, not the mask, the mantle that covered him, and all the other things. And it's just kind of like, you look at the nail and you're kind of like, wow, okay, how will this play into the movie? I wonder what somebody will do with a foot-long nail. And it's very predictable. I hate it. So they want to find somebody, the church wants to find somebody, or not the church, this guy. Because I think it's the guy. He hasn't really told the church yet. He doesn't say it publicly. This covenant is the only one who's trying to do this. It's a science experiment. They see the genetic material of Jesus, and they started searching for somebody compatible enough to really be like, this person could bring back Jesus Christ in the most perfect way. It's selective, what is it called? It's artificial selection. There's natural selection, where a person will die if they don't really evolve or they have the capacities to truly live in this type of life where they can go through. No, they're basically just going like, this person has the genetic material that I want, this person has this person has that, and they're just bringing them forth and being like, this is the person, this is the carrier. Sydney Sweeney is that perfect carrier, and the way that they present it is that they've been investigating her since she was a child. Somebody in Italy, they must have connections in, I don't know. This is where it gets really dumb, because it's not just that when she applied, they found her, or they were just sending people there, and they were like, well, when we were investigating like the DNA sample that you had, it really matched up with ours, so our plans kind of went like, we need you. No, it was like, we've been monitoring you since you were born, since you had that incident. Who do you think did it? It was I. It's insane at that point, because it's like they're watching every single kid, and like, no brainer, the church watching for kids. Whew. But like, it goes to a point where you're thinking, how did they get all this information? Like, is every hospital in America easily accessible where I could just walk in and say, I'm a priest, I need the birth documents, give me something, and they'll be like, oh sure, yeah, take it. It's wild. And I just couldn't believe that area. That area just became so far-fetched, because I think the way that you would fix it is just say, when she came there and she gave them her documents, like a birth certificate or whatever, or told her to be in here, you gotta do a blood test so that we know you're not sick or can get the other people more sick, or that if you have a condition or something, yada yada yada. Any other excuse that would take her to be in a medical situation, so that she has given them the genetic material, her genetic material. And then they realize, like, when we were looking through your stuff, we realized you're the perfect match. So that changed our plans, because their plan is to somehow out of this meat make semen off that genetic material and impregnate Sydney Sweeney against her will, to then showcase it to the world as if there's a second coming of Christ as another Virgin Mary. Because remember, she's a virgin. She's a virgin. Her hyphen hasn't ruptured, and she's pregnant. So that's the main selling point. They're making a second Virgin Mary. They're artificially making a second one. And it's wild. Because you don't really... It's a great plot line in that sense. The desperation of the church wanting to control. But it's wild to think that they were monitoring her from the beginning. And to kind of wrap things up, because the main point of the movie is that they don't really decide if they want to be very psychological or anything. It's just kind of like things happen until the final stretch of the film. You're watching things happen, she's kind of dying, and they don't want to give her medical attention because they don't want people to know about this. It's just kind of like they don't decide whether they want to be very cinematic and have good shots, because they have one good shot in the confessionary, and then they have nothing else. It just kind of continues. The color is very gray. I don't think you need to make a movie gray for it to be a horror movie. You can have colors, just decide what colors, not gray. And it just kind of becomes lackluster, because for example, that nail, the reason it's predictable is because she grabs the nail and uses it as a weapon. And that's just even stupider in my opinion. There was no reason. It was that area was dumb. The rest of the movie is enjoyable. The ending's enjoyable. The ending and the beginning are both shock factor. Sí. Cereal. Cogí cereal. The ending and the beginning of the movie are very predictable. Not predictable. The ending and the beginning of the movie just rely heavily on shock factor. And although that's great, I think the ending was a better shock factor than the beginning, because the beginning is a great setup for a very, I don't want to say boring, because you're kind of watching it, but you're more in this expectation of like what's gonna happen, so it's kind of boring, that first act. It's when it gets to the second act and you're seeing her struggle with the second trimester of pregnancy that it really gets interesting. Because then that's when things start like getting convoluted and it really becomes a mystery, and you're like, okay, trying to piece it together. That final scene, having no music and how it functions, really enjoyed it, although it's very shock, it's for shock value, it's not for everybody. Overall, the movie just ends up being like this 7 to 7.5 out of 10, because it could have been way better if it was more in line with how its first act wanted to work, not just set up, but really have a presence that something is wrong here. Because you can feel that something is wrong, but you don't really feel it, because they don't really showcase you what's going on, because there's people that are sick, senile, and insane, and some of them, you just look at them and it's like, I guess, women who are failed attempts of this sort of pregnancy. And it leads to them becoming insane because they weren't good enough. But it also makes no sense that they're all so sedated without showcasing that they were like being sedated. Because they're like insane, and I can understand the insanity, because living there, everybody would go insane. Sydney Sweeney goes insane by the end. But it kind of makes no sense that they select that. This one's gonna die. This one's gonna stay alive in like the insane ward. It's just very weird, and there's scenes where they showcase how like she's being watched, but they don't really do anything. The nuns are just watching, and it's a bit boring, right? It's a bit boring to just have somebody be like, I'm watching you. Should have had a bit more effect. It should have felt like something would happen if she was caught. It's like, imagine playing a game where you can lose, but the way that you lose, you need to intentionally lose. Like, for example, having something have an omnipresence, but know that it can still like get you, and then you just feel that tension of like it could be around me in any way, shape, or form. Like for example, if you PT is a good example of this, of atmospheric horror, of like you know this area, you know something's going on, you know there are things around, you know that something could chase you at any given moment. So now you're already in your own head overthinking it, which causes you to anticipate something that might not even be there. In the movie, they don't really do that. They try, but they don't do that because they don't really show that they have any weight or real effect on the movie. They just kind of exist, and they only do two things, and I feel like those are way too little. At very least, the protagonist tries to be smart and doesn't really act extremely dumb. Because people do tell her, like, you know, you sure, or whatever, and, you know, she's in this blissful ignorance of, like, this is my calling, whatever. And that's believable. There's no issue with that. That's not being dumb. That's just not, you know, not having all of the information, and everybody just not giving you information. Because don't you hate it whenever somebody tells you, hey, don't you think this is pretty dumb? And I'm like, well, no, why? And they just look at you like, well, you'll find out. Bro, just tell me, you know? Just say the word. And the movie is a fun watch. It's a watch that I would do with friends. I watched it in theaters with friends. Watching it alone, I probably would have had enjoyment, but like, if you want to watch a better horror movie, I would say watch Barbarian or Talk to Me. They're better movies. I might review them, might not, but they're way better movies. I just feel like this movie just falls into that area of like, not bad, not good, not mid, because it's better than mid. It's better, it has more story. It has an actual story. It just kinda loses you in that first act. Second act kinda brings you back if you stayed to watch the movie and didn't fall asleep. And the third act, although you're already tired and you want to see her do everything that she does, because she just kills everybody. She kills the bishop, she kills the nun, and she takes out the young priest. I feel like it would have been a higher payoff. I'm not saying that if she didn't do it, if there was more tension to this, because there's tension because of what they want to do to her, but they really don't touch her for the obvious reason. She learns that she can't be touched, because since she's the prized turkey, to put it like that, they're not going to touch her until she finally gives birth. So she hasn't given birth, right? So they can't really do anything to her. Well, they could cut her tongue off like they do in another thing. They could cut a finger. They did mark her foot. Like there's a bunch of things they did and could do, but they didn't really do anything else. Like in a point in time, they tie her down to a chair, but then they untie her from the chair to do a sonogram to see how the baby's going. And I feel like that's also dumb, because if you put her in a chair tied down and you don't tie her down to the bed, which you could, it just kind of dumb. And plus, putting her under so much stress probably caused like miscarriage or whatever. It's just insane how you're basically trying to convince me that a pregnant lady is going to be able to do all this. Nah, it's just insane how they go about this. Because it's not just that they're trying to like keep her there, it's just that they're trying to basically just use her as a carriage and then kill her off so that people don't know what happened. My recommendation, my final opinion to conclude the movie's enjoyable. You can watch the movie, you can enjoy it. Don't be expecting too much, because in my opinion, I didn't feel too scared. It was more like there was more gore to it, and some unnecessary gore. Not unnecessary, more like showcasing what was going on with her. And I feel like the movie probably could have benefited from a faster paced first act, or more omnipresence from the nuns being an enemy rather than them just existing. Because it wasn't just like everybody there wanted to be what her position was. There was only one character who wanted that position, and there was another character who just wanted to keep her in that position. And there was other characters that are never introduced that don't really show anything. They don't really do anything. They don't really stop anything. They don't really hide anything. There's never this moment where you feel like something is going on, right? You know something's going on because they show you weird visions or whatever, but they're kind of showcasing as if it was, hey, maybe she was dreaming, maybe she wasn't, looks a bit weird. I think they should have kept going with that because they do that once and never again. And so that kind of detracts me from the movie because I wanted more intensity. And when I say intensity, I just wanted the priest to be more believable as to being the type of character he was. He looks too much like a supermodel for the type of character he is. He looks too much like a normal supermodel. You'd see him on a Calvin Klein poster somewhere. And the nuns really should have had more effect. Because there's one nun who talks and like you see the insanity and the depravity of them and you start to understand why they're like this, which is a great world building piece. There's good world building in what's going on throughout, like, oh, you saw this in the first act, or you saw this here, and then it explains why these things are here, and it just adds to the horror of it. But they should have had these red nuns who start the film, should have done more. They barely do anything. They literally only do 3 things in the whole movie, and the movie is just, they do this, they do that, and they do that. They're not overall there. Like, you can see glimpses of them, but that doesn't mean anything. I don't feel like them just watching, and you can barely tell they're watching, is a factor enough to really put you on edge of like, where are they? What are they doing? What's going on? It's just kind of like, well, you know, they're there. It's a fine movie. Fun movie. I would watch it with friends. This is the type of movie you would watch on like summer night. It's like 1 a.m. You'd sit down with your friends and you're like, no, we gotta watch this movie. First act gets boring, then it starts like to pick up, and y'all are kind of joking around. That's the type of movie this is. It's obviously way better than Five Nights at Freddy's, in my opinion, because it obviously has a story. Its twist, it's not that it's predictable. It kinda is, in the sense of like, you know something's wrong and you're already expecting like, that's weird, this is kind of obvious, like where it's going and what they want to do with it. The twist is who's the person who wants to do it. And I just feel like it shouldn't have been so obvious, because the main bad guy does have a presence. He does do things, and you do feel like his tension, his atmosphere, him overlooking things. I just think that it should have felt more like everybody knew what was going on and everybody's eyes were on Sydney Sweeney, right? Everybody just knows what's going on and she's the only one who doesn't, and it just feels like everybody's watching no matter what. I feel like that would have added more tension. I feel like the nuns should have done more. I feel like if the priest was going to torture her, it should have been a bit harder, because he does torture her, but I think a bit too late, because it's only after it was presented the twist. I think that the nuns should have had more of an effect. I've repeated that a lot. I feel like the whole nail thing didn't need to be included. You could have switched the nail for anything else. She had a knife at some point. Could have been the knife. I don't know why it had to be the nail. And the catacombs are a bit weird, but I can let them slide as a good inclusion, a different set piece. I just feel like the story kind of ended too quickly. Like, The setup was too slow, and then it just ends. That's kind of how it felt. That second act was pretty quick, and the third act, you already know what you want to see. And it's not bad, but it's also not the best thing. You wanted more. If the build-up was better, the payoff would have been better. But the build-up was kind of weak, so the payoff, although suffice, wasn't as good as it could have been because the build-up wasn't as good. It's more that this movie's issue all relies in that first act. But then again, to end the video, it's already half an hour. Watch the movie. Not a bad movie. Don't watch Five Nights at Freddy's. Don't give your money to Insidious. Don't give your money to these jump scare based movies. Don't give it to The Nun. Don't give it to anything. Look, if you want to watch good horror movies, watch either Barbarian, The First Omen, Talk to Me, or Late Night with the Devil. Those movies are way better than Insidious, these Blumhouse cash grabs. Those are way better. So thanks for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.